Hi, everybody. It's Mrs. Picozzi. Today we're going to be talking about poetry. Specifically, we'll be talking about ways in which to annotate a poem, which is very important in making meaning from poetry. Identifying the literal story, what actually is the poet talking about. And then looking beyond the literal to make meaning from that. And you use your ability to understand figurative devices, symbolism, metaphor, etc. to do that. And drawing meaning from the text. What is the poet's message? Annotation, the literal, looking beyond the literal, drawing meaning. So how do you analyze a poem? First, you determine what the topic is. Sometimes the topic is very clearly stated in the title of the poem. Sometimes it isn't. Whether it is or it isn't, the title of the poem is extremely important. And so you should always look at that before you make a final determination on what the poet's message is. How does the poet feel about the topic, otherwise known as the theme? Why does the poet feel this way? And where is the evidence that the poet feels this way? How do you know? So here's this poem we're going to do today. It's something that's probably very familiar to you, and it's by one of our poet laureates, Robert Frost, who passed away in 1963. It's called Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening. Let's take a listen.
Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening by Robert Frost. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch his woods fill up with snow. My little horse must think it queer to stop without a farmhouse near, between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year. He gives his harness bells a shake to ask if there is some mistake. The only other sound's the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep.
Okay, so you got an idea of what actually happens. There's a man with a horse in the woods away from the village who's looking at the snow and the snow falling, and quickly decides that it's time to move on. He's got things to do before he goes to sleep. So the first thing I want you to do is I want you to look at the words that may be unfamiliar to you. This is a relatively simple poem, so I just highlighted 2 words. The first one is harness, which is a set of straps and fittings that's worn by a horse who's drawing a cart. So this turns out it's kind of important, because if you initially thought that the speaker was on horseback, it makes it a little different. He's actually in a wagon. It kind of gives you the impression that he's a working person. He's pulling, and so is the horse. The horse is a working horse. And then downy flake is downy, meaning soft and fluffy, feathery. It is a very positive, sweet look at what snow actually is. And it's gentle in this particular poem. Okay, so the next thing I want you to do is take some of the words out of context and determine whether or not they have negative or positive connotations. The negative words that I found in this poem, just in first look, were the words darkest, dark, and mistake. Out of context, they're negative, okay? The positive words that I found were little horse. I thought that was an endearing way to refer to a horse. Bells, which are often joyful and celebratory. Evening, used rather than night. Easy wind. It's not a strong wind. It's not destructive. It's not uncomfortable. Downy flake, again, is soft flakes. Lovely, of course. And promises. The next thing I want you to do is determine what the rhyme scheme is. This is a very intricate rhyme scheme, and it's considered very complex by scholars. The interesting thing about this rhyme scheme And this particular poem is that. Robert Frost, in interviews, said it took him about 20 minutes to write. He had an idea, he put it down, and it was done. This rhyme scheme is AABA, meaning that no, though, and snow are the A rhymes. Here is the B rhyme. The B rhyme is carried to the next stanza, so it's BBCB. The C rhyme is carried to the next stanza, so it's CCDC. And then the final stanza is very interesting because it has straight D rhyme scheme: deep, keep, sleep, sleep. The next thing I want you to do when you're trying to evaluate a poem is annotate. This is a really good way to annotate. And you start with, obviously, unknown words. You highlight them, you define them, and then you do the rhyme scheme and the structure of each poem. This is really what's going to lead you to your final analysis. Identify figurative language and poetic devices, images that may have deeper meaning. So the first 2.5 lines: whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. The owner of these woods is in the village, which is a more civilized or social or populated place. It's far outside the woods where he cannot see the speaker. Okay? When the innocent little horse, possibly like many people he knows, does not understand him. You might also assume the horse's routine does not include an impromptu stop in the cold for no apparent reason. And this is an unusual or rare event for both of them. So we can see that this is a special occasion or something new. Okay? Between the woods and frozen lake, the darkest evening of the year, the speaker is completely isolated at this dark location. He is the only living thing, it seems, between the woods and frozen lake. Everything is at a standstill. The darkest evening of the year, by the way, can be the winter solstice around December 21st, when the day is also the shortest of the year. But can the darkest evening of the year also be the darkest for him emotionally? That's something that we're going to have to decide, especially since the word dark is repeated so often. The only other sounds, the sweep of easy wind and downy flake. This image is quiet, comforting, and soft. The S sounds in these lines add to the softness of it. This is a very important line. It shows that the speaker is clearly at peace. He finds the woods far away from ordinary life, beautiful, almost seductive. He's drawn to the darkness and the depth of them. We often interpret these woods that are lovely, dark, and deep as a symbol of death, and which kind of explains most of the last stanza. He is momentarily drawn to stopping participation in this journey that he's on. Okay. But in the end, he has decided to continue his journey after this momentary consideration of dying, because of his obligation to others and the many things he has to do before he surrenders to the woods or the afterlife. And if you look at the last 2 lines, the repetition of "and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep," the repetition of this line indicates that he has a very long way to go before his journey ends. So then you reflect on the poem after you start picking it apart, okay? What seem to be the 3 main ideas? Clearly, this is a journey. It's probably the journey of life. It's the speaker's attraction to a place that is outside the norm, outside of the noise, outside of everyday activity, and his acceptance and obligation to what is his journey, the conclusion that is reached in the last stanza. Consider the way the poem's organization contributes to its tone. Identify the way the poet constructs stanzas, meter, and builds ideas and arguments. Try to determine what the poem is. What type of poem is this? So this is a lyric poem. A lyric poem is a private expression of emotion stated by an individual speaker. Lyric poetry is highly musical and can feature poetic devices like rhyme and meter. Some scholars categorize lyric poetry in 3 subtypes: lyric of vision, lyric of thought, and lyric of emotion. It's always about emotion. This classification is not widely agreed upon, but it's good to know. Take a very, very good look at imagery and symbolism, especially in Robert Frost's work, and language patterns. Look at the way the poet uses words, symbols, metaphors, similes, etc. to convey meaning. And then you come up with a poet's message. This is what's commonly thought of this particular poem. Stopping by woods on a snowy evening seems like a simple poem about a man driving his horse-drawn wagon on a remote road as snow falls. The speaker seems thoughtful and observant. This is the literal interpretation. The poet uses the speaker's journey as a metaphor for the journey of life. We do not know why he is far outside of the village or where he is going, but he seems to consider stopping this journey to embrace the lovely, dark, and deep lure of death. Frost's attitude toward living in the moment he captures here seems to be that while it may be appealing for a moment, leaving life voluntarily means breaking promises to loved ones, to God, who knows? But he's got promises he must keep, and he acknowledges that he has a long journey ahead. Use these strategies to find deeper meaning in the poems you read. Review the 4 questions you want to answer, always. The 4 questions are, what is the topic of the poem? How does the poet feel about the topic? Why do they feel this way? Where is the evidence? How do you know? It's almost as if you're a reporter. I ask that you read every poem that you analyze out loud twice, and always record your very first impression before you read it again. Check your vocabulary, identify words you don't know, look them up, and annotate them. Find the tone, list the words with positive connotations, list words with negative connotations. Look at the structural elements. Determine what the rhyme scheme is, if there is one, the meter or line length, and the organization of stanzas or verses. Okay, finally, just try to determine what the structural observations tell you. What type of poem is it? Lyrical, narrative, free verse? Is the rhyme scheme simple like a children's poem? Is the rhyme scheme in meter complex and challenging if one were to try to copy the structure? Does the poem sound happy and light like a children's song? Does the language slow it down and make it dreary and depressing? Are the lines short, abrupt? Is the line length varied and unpredictable? Is there repetition? If there is, it's usually something important to think about. Okay? Really try to determine what the emotion of a lyric poem is or seems to be. Okay? Always analyze the figurative language, identify any that is used, as well as poetic devices and images that may have deeper meaning. Reflect on the poem. Think about it. What did the poet say and how did he say it? How does it connect to the world, to people, to the business of life, to you? And always, when you can, try to determine what the poet's background is, personal experience, race, gender, lifestyle, generation, influences. This is Robert Frost writing in the 1920s. He was a young man. He loved nature. Most of his poems are written about rural life. The type of poetry he uses, may be very revealing. The use of literary devices convey meaning, and the sounds of the words as they are spoken establish tone and mood. Finally, you'll be able to determine what you believe is the poet's message, but this is what you must go through, this process, before you can actually come to really solid conclusions with good evidence. So when I give you a poem, I'd like you to attempt to discuss the poet's message after following this process. Many of these strategies won't work on all poems, but they are very helpful to have in your pocket. Use them when you can, and do the most thorough job you can when trying to determine what a poem is really about. Have a good day.